current science is like a bulldozer. It's not quite sensitive enough to identify something so subtle as our biofield, this field of energy and information that surrounds and permeates the physical body is a reflection of your physical, emotional, and psychological health.
This isn't woo-woo nonsense. This is actually a legitimate field of study. There's strong indication related to placebo, nocebo, psychosomatics.
When I work on someone and when I work on their field, before it would be heavy, stagnant. I would feel like there's a big block. And then afterwards, it would feel smooth. The energy can be blocked physically or emotionally. And the process is very simple.
Someone who is energetically attuned and so coherent in their thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and emotions will be way less impacted by those physical toxins.
We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Consciousness is not just limited to our physical body. What's interesting is that this connects back to the understanding of health and coherence.
Dr. Jason, good to have you, man.
Alec, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, man, it's an honor. Obviously, the biofield, for anyone who watches or listens to this podcast regularly, is a topic that I am infinitely, insatiably curious about. I did not choose this logo for the way forward because of the biofield. I actually chose it just because I thought it looked cool back in 2020 when I was choosing it. But it has evolved to have so much meaning. And I like to say that it is a top view depiction of what the human biofield or just all toroidal fields look like, which is really cool. So I'm really stoked for this conversation because this is an area that you specialize in. And I came across you on social media and just immediately fell in love with your content, the way you explain things, the topics that you're diving into related to consciousness, the biofield, and I guess you could say just metaphysics and metaphysical health is just incredible. So if we could start by you just sharing your background and a little bit about yourself and what got you into this work, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Alec, for the invitation and that wonderful intro. And I wore the shirt too, I was telling you before, specifically for your show, kind of mimicking the biofield from the top-down view. But yeah, my story, so I'm a naturopathic physician. I'm also an acupuncturist. And my, similar to you, obsession with health and thinking beyond the normal box of what society tells us health should be is I went through my own health journey as a kid. So I had very bad, severe chronic eczema, did everything under the sun in terms of Western, steroids, antibiotics, creams, all the things that said on paper should help me heal my body. But for the longest time, for the first 25 years, even while I was in naturopathic medical school, I wasn't able to really get to that root cause. And the shift happened when I discovered biofield therapies or energy healing. And that connection it comes back to what you've said about my content, connects back to consciousness. Because I think, as we all know, where attention goes, energy flows. And for me, my biggest shift was shifting the idea within myself that I could heal and working within my biofield to change certain programs, belief systems about myself, about my body. Because like for any person, right? You have 3 kids, right? They're still developing. They're still trying to understand the world, their identity. And for me, I missed that. I didn't have an opportunity to cultivate that. So that disease, that eczema was my identity. So, long story short, going through the biofield stuff, meditation, that sort of kind of opened up my paradigm. And that's my focus nowadays, is to make it easy, accessible, and, can hopefully help other people.
You do a great job
on their healing journey. Yeah.
Yeah, you do such a good job making it easily accessible to other people and explaining it in lay terms. How did you come across biofield related stuff to begin with? Because it's not taught in naturopathic school at all.
It's not taught in naturopathic school at all. Yeah, when we were talking about that, for those that don't understand. So in naturopathic medical school, we're taught the idea of the vis, which is, life force. The body has this energy, right? And there's certain herbs, right, that are more correlated to your body's constitution, in a very small sense, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine does that much more fine-tuned with like a scalpel. But biofield therapies came to me when I was in college, actually.
Pre-med at the time.
Pre-med
you were thinking about being a normal allopathic doctor, right?
Yes, yeah. I was thinking about it. And I'm like, wait, it hasn't helped me. So let me think about this. But a person from India came for their master's degree, and they invited students to this meditation night. And in that meditation, I was the only person there, but I felt such a deep sense of peace and calm, and I really felt the energy started shifting. I'm sure you can relate when you get into your, first significant meditation experience. And they were focusing on the heart center and then the crown center. And those ideas I was familiar with, but I wasn't really like sure about. And this meditation was part of what's called the Pranic healing modality, if you've heard of that. So one thing led to another. I took the Pranic healing system, and an easy way to understand Pranic healing is like acupuncture without needles, or Reiki sort of on steroids, because there's a whole system. It's systematized, so it's really easy to understand. And me also, that inspired me to do acupuncture along with naturopathic medicine. So that's sort of what opened me up there.
Can you share a little bit more about pranic healing? Because I've heard of it before, and I know it's different than Reiki, but similar-ish to Reiki in concept. Can you share about it?
Yeah. So pranic healing, so Reiki, let's go back to Reiki. Reiki was founded in like the early 1900s with Usui, Japanese origin. Pranic healing came about in the 1980s, 1990s. The founder's name was Master Choa Koksui. Funny note is that they both have the same birthdays, which is August 15th, and they both come from the same lineage of Buddhist masters, basically. So funny connection there. And Master Choa Koksui basically, studied all the different types of energy healing practices, from all across the world, and synthesized it into this really simple body. And basically, there are very simple techniques that we teach, and I'm an instructor too, that we teach to people that you can start applying right away, whether you feel the energy or you don't feel the energy. And it's different from Reiki, is that Reiki is very much intuitive. It's guided, right? You have the symbols, but very much you can be leaned one way or another way, depending on whoever comes to you. Pranic healing is a recipe, which is someone comes in with back pain, someone comes in with depression. There's like a protocol, and you work on specific fields or points or chakras or energy centers. And you just follow the instructions, you do the practice, and then 90% of the time they feel a difference.
I heard you on another podcast talking about how in your experience, you found that this is actually more impactful than acupuncture.
Yes. Yeah. And I say that because I am a practicing acupuncturist. I do work in an office.
So you're not poo-pooing acupuncture either.
I'm not. I'm here. I love acupuncture, and acupuncture was one of the ways that helped me too. I definitely felt it open up in my body, but adding on this component was so much more powerful, because acupuncture, again, it's like autopilot. You put in the needle, the body will do its thing. But when you have the practitioner come in, and of course, this is, whether it's Reiki, pranic healing, or another energy healing modality, stuff is always being released out of your field. And sometimes, as you know, the body can only detox as much as it's capable of. And having the person there just speeds up the progress. So for me, based on my practice, acupuncture with the pranic healing is like 90%. I see like right away, like after the session, they see results. Acupuncture, maybe 65% of the time.
So it's both combined acupuncture with pranic healing then?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's the 90% part.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So this leads into an important topic I want to get into, because when I heard you say that, my mind immediately went to root cause. And I'm not suggesting that acupuncture in and of itself is only dealing with the physical body, because it's not. We know we're talking about like energetic meridians that are flowing throughout the body. That's what acupuncture is dealing with. But it is an inherently physical process. You're using a physical, like really small needle to place in certain points, certain meridians across the body. So you're dealing with the physical body in order to break into, probably not the best term, you're not breaking into, but in order to free up the energy to move freely through the body. versus pranic healing, you're using energy primarily, right? Like, is pranic healing similar to Reiki in that if you are putting your hands on someone, it's very subtly?
Yeah.
I guess describe that piece to me.
Yeah.
I think you see where I'm getting at, right?
Yes, that's a very important part, because I think for a lot of people, without that physical component, they might not, their minds might not stick to it. But
nocebo comes in possibly then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what's interesting with Reiki is that you can have hands on or hands off. Pranic healing is strictly hands off.
Wow.
So that's the thing. When I'm working on someone, needles in or not, I never touch them. And again, the energy that we do use, we're not using our life force. We're using the energy that's around us, as you know, and
whether you want to call it the ether, the information field, conscious field, whatever,
which is unlimited.
Yeah.
Which is why, you know, as you may have seen, Alec, like some practitioners, they might have a certain limit in seeing clients a day. For me, I can work on as many as I want because I'm not using my own energy, and there's certain energy hygiene, practices that we do so we don't get contaminated.
Definitely want to talk about that. Okay, that answers my question perfectly, knowing that pranic healing, you don't actually touch them at all. Because this is what I'm getting at. This points to what I've come to understand regarding both the nature of this realm and also the nature of this realm as it applies to us and our health. But I've said this before on a number of other podcast episodes that I think overwhelmingly, I won't say exclusively, overwhelmingly, our dis-ease states are linked to something that is metaphysical in nature, something that is not physically tangible. Like, of course, there are toxins in our environment. There's malnutrition. Don't get me wrong. But I think that someone who is energetically attuned and aligned and so coherent in their thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and emotions will be way less impacted by those physical toxins and the malnutrition, and possibly impervious to the physical toxins and malnutritions, talking like a guru level, right? It takes a very, very strong individual to get to that. But all that to say, when you're describing pranic healing having more effectiveness than just acupuncture on its own, it seems to point to that, because it's like, you're not doing anything physical. You're not putting your hand on someone, but you're dealing with something that is subtle, yet I think the most important aspect of our health and who we are.
No, I have to agree. And we learned that very on. You know, some cultures might not have this apparent, but of course, me being Chinese and being steeped into traditional Chinese medicine, we're aware of this energy field and its impact on our body. And even in our language, we say that even certain foods, right, are too heat or inflammatory for our body, or too cold. So the understanding of these energetics and these elements are part of our language, and it points to that exact same thing you're talking about. For thousands of years, all these traditions have been talking about this, and the scale of how far goes beyond just healing in terms of this reality in itself. And that's why I love talking about this, because even though we're talking about the biofield, this energy, it really comes back to consciousness and who we are and what it means to be here and talk to you right now.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So let's set the table appropriately here, because I've talked about the biofield a lot, but I don't think I've actually done my due diligence in looking up the actual definition. I think I maybe have shared it on one episode where I was just reading the National Institute of Health, their definition of the biofield. I don't remember if I did or not, but nonetheless, I talk about it a lot, but I've not defined what it is. So I'd invite you, if you could, to define the biofield according to your understanding.
Sure. And I have to give credit to the giants before me that have, pushed, in the academic institutions, Dr. Shamini Jain, Richard Hammerschlag. They're part of CHI, which is the Consciousness Healing Initiative, where they're the big biofield academic collaborative. And the biofield is defined as this field of energy and information that surrounds and permeates the physical body, that is a reflection of both your physical, emotional, and psychological health, basically. And that idea being that it's like the blueprint, right? So if you change the blueprint, sometimes it can be immediate down to the physical level, but sometimes it might take, a couple days. So that's the definition of the biofield.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And with that, if I remember correctly, the National Institute of Health, in their definition of it, they describe it being the electromagnetic field and other fields.
Yeah.
And they don't specifically define what those other fields are. And I want to circle back to, let's say, the very skeptical materialist. When they hear these types of topics discussed, they'll refer to very limited research that has been done trying to measure things like radio waves coming off the body, because people like you and I and many of the people who listen to this podcast say, no, there's something real about intuition. There's something real about this other than verbal and other than body language communication going on that might be more primary to who we are and how we communicate with each other. They'll hear that and respond to it with, well, I don't know what you're talking about, because they've tried to measure radio frequencies and Wi-Fi and other areas of the electromagnetic spectrum on the human body, and they're not finding anything. So therefore, there's no evidence that this is a real phenomenon. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because the presupposition there is that if it can't be measured with limited human instrumentation, it is not real. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I love that question, Alec, because it points to the root of the question itself is what is science, and how does science define something to be real? And for the audience, I always say that there's a couple pieces to understanding evidence. So first, evidence, of course, is the evidence that we think of when we think of science is the published, peer-reviewed literature, right? A meta-analysis, making sure that there's hundreds of studies that's backing up what something says to claim it does. But then there's the piece of evidence that is not studied, which is the evidence of someone, like a case study, like someone comes to this healer and they had this chronic condition and it magically gets healed overnight, right? And this person has done it repeatedly over time. So that's the evidence that's, again, not studied under controlled, randomized, replicable conditions. But that's another piece of evidence. So for me, it's always balancing those both, right? Because one starts to lead to another, right? You need to have enough interest to get to that side. And something that my teachers have taught me is that, just like how every day we're growing and evolving, same thing for science and these instruments. We simply don't have the technology yet to be able to measure them. And one of my teachers best described it. It's like current science is like a bulldozer, right? It's very good at taking things down, right? But it's not quite sensitive enough to measure something, to identify something so subtle as our biofield, which we're getting to. I mean, we'll talk about a couple studies later on, but I think that this points us in the direction, again, of what consciousness is, right? Because I think that everything is a reflection of our level and our evolutionary state of our consciousness. So as science progresses, humanity too, with their view of life, will also progress.
Yeah, amen. I totally resonate with what you're saying there. I want to make a distinction too, real quick, for those who are familiar with my skepticism of virology. With respect to the biofield, it's not a claimed physical thing, at least not in terms of like physical matter. Like maybe some will say it's plasma based or something like this too. But the point that I'm getting at is when it comes to claims that are made by the purveyors of the prevailing scientific paradigm, they're talking about cause and effect claims as it relates to physical things. And so the onus is on them to actually provide the evidence of those cause and effect claims. And when it comes to something like this, the challenge is we're talking about something that is inherently metaphysical. So it's almost like there needs to be a separate category, because you and I are talking offline, like when it comes to doing controlled experiments, even if they are physical controlled experiments, the thing that we're going to get into a lot during this episode is you cannot possibly control for the interference of the human psyche, which all signs point to having a tremendous impact on physical reality. So if you're trying to isolate an independent variable to vary and manipulate to see if it produces an effect, and you're controlling for the other variables, you really can't control for the human psyche. Now apply that to studying something that is inherently metaphysical on top of that. Then it's like we need a completely different framework, because you're not going to be able to do a controlled experiment when we're discussing something that is inherently metaphysical. You're just not.
Yeah. Or it's going to be really, really hard until we figure out, okay, hey guys, this was really, really hard. Let's do it another way. And I resonate with that because we spoke offline how, in China, before traditional Chinese medicine removed all the psi and the parapsychology out of its medicine, it talked about, psychics, you going to a psychic Chinese medicine doctor and, you have a tumor, and then he would cyclically remove it, right? And, it'd be a case study, but they've studied it, right, too, in China. And they fell into the same challenges where once you've put it into a lab, and maybe it's what you're talking about, it's people's criticisms and their, preconceived ideas, the energy that's floating around, something like interfering with the coherence of whatever the practitioner was trying to work with. So, this is definitely not a new topic, and it is exciting to me because then it points to what you're asking. Well, what is the solution, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think those solutions will emerge.
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to just riff as long as you want on some of the coolest research you've come across with respect to consciousness and healing and the biofield. And I'll just ask questions if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. And I have to give a lot of credit to the amazing organizations that are sponsoring and funding these types of research. As you know, Alec, you're not going to get an NIH grant for this. And if you do, you're going to burn through the money in like a month. So there's a couple of key organizations like the Emerald Gates Foundation, MD Anderson Cancer Center, which is the #1 cancer center here in Texas that is open enough to do this type of research, and also the amazing organization at Chi, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative with Dr. Shamini Jain there. So the idea I want to point out to the audience is that there's a saying where attention goes, energy flows. So if that is true, and as we're talking about, how can we put this into an experiment? So a couple of the most groundbreaking biofield studies have come out of MD Anderson using a technique called the Bankston method, if you've heard of that before.
I've not.
Yeah. So the Bankston method is really cool. It's been labeled as an energy healing modality, but it's really like a visualization, mental imagery technique, which again, talking about biofield, energy, like consciousness, thoughts, emotions. So to give the audience an idea, the Bankston method is what they call cycling. So you imagine a list of items, just like a shopping list of items that you want: a car, a house, a vacation, and then you picture it, right? You picture it. This is the car. This is the house. This is the vacation, and then you cycle it in your mind as if it's like a film strip, right? And it's like playing constantly and constantly and constantly. And the idea behind that, Alec, is so that our conscious mind, our ego, that default brain network can slowly quiet down. And then we access this more subconscious, unconscious part of us, which people talk about is, when you attract things in your life, that's where the biggest attractors come from, is in that state of consciousness.
Can I ask a question related to that real quick? Sorry to interrupt. Is it because, and I'll speak to my own experience with quote unquote like manifestation. I don't even like that term because I think it's just like a co-creative process we're in. I think is, again, fundamentally metaphysical. But is it because when you're cycling through multiple things at once, you're not getting hung up with an egoic attachment on one thing where you start creating stories based in your preconceived, possibly limiting beliefs surrounding that thing, and then it sort of sabotages the process? Is that why you do this cycling?
Sure. Yeah. And I can't comment on, Bill Bankston, who was the founder of this method, if that was his core idea, but that was one of the reasons why.
That is one of them.
That I think that's one of the reasons I've heard of people talk about. Okay. Is because, yes, when we have attachment, right? There, we can talk about this too in other biofield contexts. It becomes a block basically, and you want to. Same thing in acupuncture, same thing in different traditions. Health is defined as free flow of chi and blood. So same thing in our mind, right? When there's this free flow happening, when you're not attached and then you're just cycling like a windmill, things, energy, matter, energy tends to come in place to how our body is the technology and how it's coming together. So that's the cycling method from the Bankston method. So there's a part 1 and a part 2 of the study. In part 1, they worked on pancreatic cancer cells. Okay. And what's cool is that they had a very experienced cyclist from the Bankston healing method. And there were Petri dishes, right? And there's no touch. He's in a lab. He's hooked up to this EEG brain scan. And the cells were also simultaneously being scanned for changes in terms of its intracellular calcium levels. And this is important for people that don't understand intracellular calcium levels. Higher intracellular calcium levels has been shown to be much more aggressive in terms of its metastatic spread, cancer spread, right? Much more aggressive in terms of how those metastatic tumors grow in terms of volume. So when they tested this part 1 with the healer, after dozens and dozens and dozens of different replications, they found when the healer got into that healing state, that cycling state, the changes in his brain waves appeared to be causally connected to the changes to the intracellular calcium levels in those pancreatic cancer cells. So a drop in intracellular calcium levels, which suggests, decreased metastatic spread and burden, which is very cool. So that was sort of the first study of its type. Again, showing how the non-locality of consciousness, and then again, this being labeled biofield energy healing, it really comes back to our mind.
Do you know what he was cycling when he was doing the cycling process?
I would love to know. I think that because what's cool about this experiment is that it was randomized, blinded. So he didn't know which Petri dishes had the cancer cells, which Petri dishes were controlled. I think the general theme, as I know, is you're invoking love, compassion, healing, coherence, right?
That's interesting though, man, to know that it was randomized and blinded at that level, because I would have thought that he was cycling specifically related towards one dish and cycling based on thoughts of like the cancer decreasing, the calcium levels decreasing or something like that. Hearing that it wasn't tailored specifically towards those outcomes is really interesting, because like I'd love to hear what you've come across in your research. And I do want to get into the other studies related to MD Anderson, that when you focus specific intention on something, it is more powerful, possibly, and I could be wrong, than just creating a general field of love and coherence. But I don't know. I could be totally wrong on that.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I think going back to the study, I'll have to look into it because I'm not sure. But I think the general theme with the Bankston method, in terms of just the healing component, I know that the overlying themes of love, compassion, forgiveness is always there. I'm not sure as the specifics. I think that they might, and I'll double check it afterwards, that he was intending for the cancer cells to decrease. Now that I'm thinking of it, I think that is the case because he needs something to, point to.
Yeah. Like to orient his awareness,
to visualize. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, there's so many things I want to pull on there. I'll set them aside though. So we can continue with the next one.
Yeah. So what's cool is that was the part 1. So I think that came out last year. And now part 2, which was published this year, they used that same healer, same setup where they hooked him up to the brainwave scan, and they measured with 4 mice, and they hooked up the mice to these brain scans as well, which is kind of crazy to see. And this was the first ever type of study showing studying live simultaneous interaction, human to animal interaction in a controlled setting. So, and the idea was that, okay, since it appeared to work on the cells, how does it affect mice and mice with cancer? And now, so sort of jumping to the results, what's interesting is that when the healer got into that same state of cycling, right, it mimicked the same brainwave results from part one. So at least we can see that the healing state seems to be real and it's replicable, and we see that in terms of his brainwaves. Now, number two was that there appeared to be what's called coupling when his brainwaves matched the brainwave activity of these mice. And this is very precise, Alec. They're measuring, it's called hyperscanning, okay? They're measuring changes to 1/1000th of a second. So this is very, very precise type of work. And they found some correlation data in terms of when the healer was working to brain centers in the mice related to emotion and memory, okay, versus when the healer was not working. There's some other things that were not so clear because, with mice, they're moving around and things like that. But at least this, in some data with the cancer mice that are still not fleshed out yet, but at least this shows, again, like there's physical distance. There's no touch or contact. So this totally changes the materialistic paradigm that in order for something to change, you need physical contact. So it's just really exciting. And, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
So when you came across these studies and this research that is being done, where did your mind go, like in terms of extrapolating based on that data and applying it to us as human beings in our day-to-day interactions and health?
Yeah, it sort of that's a great question, because for me it's like, duh, it's validating.
Right, of course. It's validating what you already knew to be true somewhere deep inside of you, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I know Eileen McCusick and a lot of great other healers and practitioners that are sensitive to this type of work and energy. And some people can see it too. For me, it's much more physical. Sometimes I can see or hear things, but it's very much physical for me. And
what do you mean by that physical? Like you feel it in your body where they're experiencing it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It like I feel it internally, or it would be if I'm turned on and I'm working on someone, like a patient in my clinic, I would feel it in my hands, even though I'm not touching them. So it'd be heat, warmth, And what's interesting is that this connects back to the understanding of health and coherence and what that really means. And what that really means to me is that when I work on someone and when I work on their field, before it would be heavy, stagnant, like I would feel like there's a big block. And then afterwards, it would feel smooth, right? It would feel like, the saying I say, it's like cars running along a highway. There's no traffic, right? Versus cars in a highway, there's a traffic jam. You can see it. You can feel the tension in that part of the body. So for me, it was just validating because, again, I'm not touching them. I'm using my intention and using certain techniques to move this energy, which creates this coherence, which improves the field. And then slowly over time, the physical body will materialize these changes.
I wonder if this almost could, in some instances, for you and for other people who may be energy workers hearing this information that we're sharing, just act as a gentle nudge to help reinforce their belief in their own paradigm. Like, no, this is legitimate. I'm not psyching myself out. This isn't woo-woo nonsense. This is actually a legitimate field of study, which then makes your work better because I think there's strong indication related to placebo, nocebo, psychosomatics, and things like this, that our belief about something has a direct effect on our ability to do that thing.
Sure. Yeah. And that's exactly why when you see something, right, as possible and you believe it and you imagine it to happen, right, it has this amplifying effect, because we know with consciousness, and the same thing with different theories in physics, there's almost like what I call like a rebound effect, Alec, right? If you go all the way to one way, like specifically with the placebo effect, and I find that for a lot of practitioners, they tend to struggle with, because clients, this is, it's probably just placebo, but I'm open to it. And then immediately when they hear that, they get a little discouraged, and that affects how they perform when they're doing their practice. But for me, there's a really simple idea to understand this, and it's called receptivity and conductivity. And this is really important to all types of, not only healers, but we talk about consciousness too, right? And when we talk about nocebo, placebo, and receptivity is the basic idea is that, okay, how open are, right? How willing, if this energy comes into your body, how willing are you to receive it and hold it? Okay, so that's receptivity. And that goes in both ways for the client and the practitioner. Okay, because sometimes, as you know, certain practitioners might not be receptive, even though they're, they say they are. And this is why everyone's a filter. We have our own filters, and it's really important, as you know, once you get into that healing session, to drop your ego, drop those filters, and let whatever needs to come through. But, right, once that energy starts flowing through you into the client, there's a piece called conductivity. So think of a copper wire, right? Electricity passes through a copper wire. The purity of the copper wire is what matters, right? So a copper wire that's 99% pure is going to conduct electricity much better than a copper wire that's 80% pure. So this is why, again, where attention goes, energy flows. For a lot of people, what I recommend is you really need to be cognizant of these two pieces, like two sides of the same coin, which will amplify your healing, and not only your healing, but if you have goals, right? If you have intentions, it's the same thing, right? What are you willing to receive, and how hard are you willing to work to achieve those things?
I love that, man. So when it came to healing all the ailments you were dealing with, can you just walk me through that process and some of the practices that were biofield related that you did?
Yeah. So, for my case, I've had severe chronic eczema for 25 years. And one of the key things that I noticed was, and this connects back to the mind component so much. And this, I talk about the mind-body connection a lot, because sometimes I feel like it's a safe word for people to open up and to understand these ideas. And really, it was working on the energy centers related to self-worth, believing that I could heal, believing that I wasn't just this person that its body never worked, basically. And those stored traumas, as you know, as we know, in biofield tuning as well, there's different
so many
parts,
different approaches
that are there. And it's a really simple idea of removing those seeds, and in order to not allow the weeds to grow. Because what happens a lot is that when I went through my healing journey, taking all the steroids and medications, which helped, right, to a certain degree, but it never addressed the root cause, right? It would just nip the weeds halfway, but then the weeds would keep growing because it wasn't addressing what was underneath it, right, in the roots. And for me, that was this deep-seated idea that my body was a failure. And I no matter how much I tried to heal myself, I couldn't heal. So it was physically healing the skin, of course, using the biofield techniques, which is in pranic healing, but also mentally and emotionally working on those energy centers. And what's unique, again, about pranic healing is that each energy center, each chakra, has a physical and a psychological component. Okay. And for me, the solar plexus was a big one, which is connected to your gut, right? So people talk about the gut brain connection, the gut skin connection. The gut is talked about in the wellness industry so much. And yes, my gut was definitely not in a good state. I did stool tests, I did the functional medicine tests, right? My good bacteria was super low. My bad bacteria was super high. Yes, that was a component. But on top of that, I layered on this pranic healing process, which was every day I would go in, remove the weeds very simply. So there's basically two techniques. It's called cleansing and energizing. And I'm not allowed to disclose what those techniques are, but I can describe it for you. But basically, it's when you scan someone and you feel this congestion, well, the first thing you do, before you put energy into it, before you put fertilizer into a system, you want to take out the stuff that's not supposed to be there. So a big component for me was energetic hygiene, was taking out the stuff that wasn't coherent in my body, and then energizing on top.
What did that look like in terms? I know you can't disclose the specifics, but just for you, when we talk about taking out the stuff that wasn't supposed to be there, let's, how do I put this? Do your best to describe the quality and characteristics of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for the audience, so the solar plexus is located at the sort of center of the rib cage, right, where the sternum is. And when we would scan, and the scanning technique is basically your hands like a metal detector, you would find some area of congestion, heaviness. It would feel like heat is coming off, and it's just hard to move through it. So congestion in the sense is where energy is blocked, and the energy can be blocked physically or emotionally. And the process is very simple. You go in there, and there's a technique where you use certain hand movements, and you remove that congested energy. And it would remove one layer, right? It's like an onion. It's like you remove one layer, you remove one layer, you remove one layer. And slowly over time, that onion gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then the energy or blood flow also becomes better. It moves through that area better. And for me, when I noticed that, my skin in that area started getting better as well, which is very interesting. So, and then my gut health improved as well, taking a stool test before and a stool test after. And full disclosure, I wasn't really big on the physical side. So I wasn't following the diet, the supplements, the lifestyle component too much, because I was already kind of jaded through my past of trying all these things and didn't work. So I was really focused on the energetic side. So for me, it was like, okay, it wasn't just, because I would take it, here and there, follow the supplements in here and there, but it was really that biofield practice, that pranic healing that really pushed the needle for me.
Most healthcare today operates on an outdated mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rush diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols, addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result? Another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Cowan co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Cowan has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream. It's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, F-O-R-W-A-R-D, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember. Well, I think that is getting to the root, though. Again, like going back to what I said earlier, it's not that toxins and malnutrition don't play a role. They absolutely do. And I think if anything, they play a role in that they're giving you the fertile soil to be able to process emotions and traumatic events better than you could otherwise, and giving you the fertile soil to have more coherent belief systems And again, in extreme cases, are there toxins that will literally kill you regardless of your belief systems? Sure. But again, there's also examples of like Prahlad Jani. Have you heard of him? Okay, Prahlad Jani, he was a guy in India who claimed to the Indian government that he had not eaten or drank anything in over 60 years, right? So when we talk about malnutrition, like, my goodness, he's going to be malnourished. They took him into a hospital in India, had a urologist, cardiologist, every ologist you can name, study him for 15 days. Did not eat or drink once in 15 days. So at the least, they confirmed he did it for 15 days. He's claiming 60 years, right? And there's an account of one of the people who was monitoring him, and they had like CCTV cameras hooked up, watching him 24/7 to make sure there's no way he was possibly cheating. And they confirmed 15 days without any food or water. He ran up the stairs faster than some of the people working at the hospital when he had to go to another floor to be monitored for something. And they also found that his bladder would fill up with fluid, and then the fluid would dissipate, and then fill up with fluid and dissipate. But the point that I'm getting at is, like, yes, for most of us, there's some extreme poisons and toxins, and malnutrition is definitely going to play a role. And there are examples, and there are other stories throughout history, both in China and India and other places, in South America and some places, of people who are so attuned themselves where none of that's even a consideration anymore, because they've dealt with the foundation, which is the metaphysical aspect of who we are, I think.
Yeah. And I think we were talking offline again, that seems to be where all this is pointing to, right? Because it speaks to what many people have talked about, right? Is these types of people are like the role models that we can see and look up to and aspire to be. But we have not yet reached there. And a big point in a lot of these metaphysical or spiritual communities that a lot of people don't talk about, which is very important, is character building. Because what happens is, as far as I know, these energy centers, they can grow and develop based on good virtues and characters too. And you could find this in all types of spiritual traditions when you talk about Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, even, things like the Lord's Prayer, right? That is a download in itself, right? When you talk about our Father, who art thou in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So the heart and the crown.
I've never thought about it like that. Wow.
So yeah. So, again, these teachings come, it's all out there, but I've learned it through Pranic healing, which we have our own spiritual branch too. And it talks about the same thing, is that the evolution of the human species is not just physical, it's in our consciousness. And in order to get to that next level of what that reality looks like, our character has to be in alignment too, in addition to the technology, in addition to everything else.
Yeah. Amen, man. Amen. I have one more question. I'll probably have a few that come up throughout the episode as you talk, but one more question related to this process of healing your own issues is, when you were doing that pranic healing process on your gut solar plexus area, when you would pull out those weeds, so to speak, did you experience any emotional releases related to that?
Yeah, it was and to preface, I was doing this technique every day for months. And that's the protocol, right? In pranic healing, it's very much like allopathic energy healing. There's a protocol, right? You have to follow, you have to do it. It's like dosing. You have to do it at this time, this many times a week, and blah, blah, blah. But there was a lot of emotional purging. And for me, because I couldn't express my emotions, my thoughts, my skin was the outlet, right? It was my skin was the outlet for not only the physical toxins, but the emotional and the mental. And what's interesting is I couldn't sweat too. A big thing for me was I couldn't sweat. So actually sauna was another thing I used that was helpful for me. So again, my physical body was like a reflection. It was trying to heal, and it wasn't doing anything wrong. It wasn't malfunctioning. There was just something incoherent about how my mind, body, spirit connection was aligned and inherited. that it had to happen this way. So for me, it was connected to the solar plexus. So for those that don't know, the solar plexus is connected to your gut, right? Your digestive system, but it's also connected to yourself and your self-will, your own desires, what's best for nourishing your body, your mind. A lot of people with big solar plexus, they can be, on the extreme end, they could be narcissistic, they can be selfish, right? But people with weak solar plexus, they're like, a doormat, right? So people, you can get walked over. So for me, I had a very much a weak solar plexus, not only being a people pleaser, which is, trying to avoid people looking at me because of my body image issues, but also I didn't have a sense of direction in life because I didn't know who I was, right? And part of that emotional purging was to let go of all those fears and those anxieties and worries related to this physical vessel, right? Which is temporary, but what it reminded me is the permanence of what truly exists, which is our consciousness, which again, my meditative practice, I've had experiences, but I've studied, all these different traditions, and they talked about how, again, energy is never created or destroyed. It's always being transformed. And there seems to be something that has come into this body to learn this lesson in this lifetime. And it was majorly purging those thought forms and emotions of lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem, and confidence issues. Yeah.
Right there, what you said, thought forms and emotions. This was my follow-up question to that. So I don't want to say that there's a divergence or a split of thought related to emotions and trauma, but there almost seems to be subtly in that one camp would say that it's purely our beliefs. Another camp might say that it's stored emotions and it's quite literally stored to where it's like deeper than the belief level. You could say it's like subconscious beliefs that are driving you, but nonetheless like stored things that are actually stored in your tissues, some would say, right? And and of course, let me be clear here too, there's a whole spectrum in between that. And there's a lot of crossover between the two. And there's a lot of paradigms that talk about it being both. What I'm getting at though, is in this pranic healing approach, you're talking about pulling out the weeds, right? And you said thought forms and beliefs, if I remember what you said correctly. So with you and with your experience treating patients and things like this, do you find that it's a mix of both actual thought patterns and then also stored trauma inside of their body or their etheric body or something like this, or the biofield?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's a yes and a yes. The stored component is very interesting because what I find and what I've noticed being an acupuncturist is that, there's acupuncture points on the body, and the textbook would say, it's between your thumb and your pointer finger. But when you come to check, the points tend to move, right? It's not fixed, right? Even though the textbooks say it has to be here, right? This is where it's supposed to be. When you check, it tends to move, and 1 week could be here.
How do you check, by the way?
So they teach you well, this kind of goes beyond the textbooks, but when you check for large intestine 4, which is, a point between your thumb and your pointer finger in the meaty part in the web of your hand right here, it should be sort of at the highest point at the center. But when you press it, and if it doesn't hurt, and if you press another spot and it hurts more, that's more stimulating. That point is now there. And also you can energetically feel it too. So for me, it's more energetic for me. So I notice when I touch a point, I immediately feel the flow. And this answers your question because with stored trauma, it's stored for a reason. It's stored because it got backed up to a place, and now your body's like, it needs to get pushed, right? It needs to get pushed over here. And it's a very poetic saying in acupuncture because we talk about these meridians, these nadis, these channels, right? This flow of energy, and that the body's literally like nature, right? When something is blocked, right, it doesn't grow in perfect order, right? It tends to move and slide, and based on what you're doing throughout your day too. So that's where stored trauma tends to come from, is when, the initial block is so much that it's now needed to move to another place in the body.
Kind of like if a river gets dammed up and it still needs to flow, it'll find a different path.
Yes, exactly. And from my experience with pranic healing, stored traumas are usually, they're all over the body, but they're usually more in the back energy centers. Okay.
Interesting.
The back usually relates more to the past. The front is more towards the present. And then, of course, when I'm working on someone, though, right, when you're talking about the thought forms and belief systems, usually what comes up, again, it's in layers. So the first part is usually the superficial, right? The stuff that are easy to deal with. And it's sort of like, how I describe it, it's like a hay barrel, and you go at it and you go at it. And then once you get deeper and deeper into the roots, those are where the belief systems are, right? That's where the seeds are of this person generating these thoughts and emotions. And for me, it was very much like that feeling. It was like sort of getting to the root of it, and it would be thicker and heavier, thicker and heavier. So that's why healing, it does take time, because you can't really, slam your way to the root. It has to come out in a way that your body has the capacity to start letting those things go.
Yeah, because like when I'm thinking about this work related to, for example, Joe Dispenza, and I've not attended any of his retreats or anything like that, so I can't speak to it with direct experience, but from what I've heard and from what I've heard him say personally, his approach to healing these things energetically is really just dealing with the beliefs of an individual and repatterning beliefs that seems to shift. Could it be that, I'm going to try to articulate this as best I can, that by repatterning a belief system and thought patterns so deeply, that by default is also pulling the weeds of those very deeply layered subconscious belief systems and quote unquote stored trauma that we have? You see what I'm saying there?
Yeah. And I think that's a really great point, because Joe Dispenza is probably one of the foremost figures when we think about and when we talk about the mind-body connection and how, again, reprogramming the mind through his whole process, which is bringing yourself to an elevated emotional state, having that clarity of intention, and being in a group environment, which is his retreats, thousands of people all being into coherence, right? And it's an amplifying effect, right? And we talk about in pranic healing how when you meditate in a group, it amplifies, multiple X's for every person involved. And I think that he's really much coming from that top-down level as well. And for me, I try to go about from the bottom-up approach, which is, manually going in there, cleaning someone out, right, slowly but surely, of these, stored traumas or, limiting thought forms and belief systems. And when I say limiting thought forms and belief systems, it's not actually like I'm taking that all at once, but I'm approaching it like kind of thought by thought.
And you're also not doing talk therapy. You're like extracting something that is almost like an entity.
Yeah. And there can be entities too.
In pranic healing, there is?
Yeah, we talk about that.
Wow.
And not to diverge too much, but entities are living beings, and they can be created by our own field, by our own thoughts, or it can be from someone else, or it can be from an environment.
Could it also be like there are quite literally etheric beings that are just not embodied, that are neither created by us or anyone else, that just live in the ether, that some might refer to as demons or something like that?
Yeah. And that's, again, in traditional Chinese medicine, we have points for kicking out ghosts in your body, right? So it's been around and talked about for thousands of years. But yes, to go back to Joe Dispenza, I think he comes from really this top-down approach, where it doesn't matter if you have a entity, whether you picked it outside or from your grandma's lineage, right? It's all kind of flushing it down from this top-down level, which points back to, the perspective of our conversation, Alec, is that we really have the power to change and heal in so many different ways. But I think when you get so clear in your consciousness, and it becomes easier when you have that elevated emotional state, because it makes it more believable. And then you have that clarity of intention and that repetition, your field automatically becomes more coherent.
Amen, man. You mentioned some experiences that you'd had meditating that really made you aware of this. Can you talk about that a little bit, and then also talk about some of the practices that you do on a daily basis?
Yeah. So I'm sure we all had our, I call it a spiritual awakening or a outer body experience. And this was before all the energy healing stuff. This was before all that. I was in high school and I was learning to meditate. And it was my third time, I think, ever trying to meditate. And this speaks back to the mind-body connection and the power of our mind. Where the meditation was, where I was doing was I was focusing on, it was a third eye meditation. You would close your eyes, visualize this blue pearl, this blue ball in the center of your head. So I did it the first 2 days, nothing happened. Did it the third day, and then I felt this the blue ball showed up, but then there was this like explosion of light, right? It was almost like the sun was inside of my mind. And then my body, even though I was, sitting in my bedroom cross-legged, it was like physically vibrating.
I've had the same experience before.
Yeah. It was crazy. It was almost like getting strapped on for a roller coaster ride that I didn't sign up for. And when my body started vibrating, that's when it hit my mind. That's when the memories opened up. And when I say memories, like, oh, this is not the only layer of reality. There's multiple layers of reality.
You remembered an aspect about yourself.
I remembered an
forgotten.
aspect, right?
Yeah.
Just by that experience of my body vibrating, because I could tell I was going up to somewhere, but I didn't let that happen because I was too scared. I'm like, I think I'm going crazy. So I had to like wake myself up.
Do you think your fear is what it, like stopped it from happening?
Yeah.
Dude.
Yeah.
I've had the exact same experience. Mine was in a dream, but then I woke up in reality and was vibrating from head to toe still. And that's where in the dream, I like lifted above my body and felt this insane bliss, and I was vibrating, and I was in a room full of people, one being my grandpa, who at the time in reality was not speaking to at all, could not stand him, but then had this experience where I felt deep love and compassion for him. And then once I felt that in the dream is when I lifted above my body and started vibrating from head to toe, which is interesting. And then I got kind of like, not fearful in that, like I was like so in terror, but I was like, oh, what is this? I haven't felt this before, kind of fearful, but also at the same time, love and bliss. And then the experience stopped, but I woke up in my bed still vibrating from head to toe. And I was like, what is this, dude?
That's pretty cool. I don't think I've heard of that, Alec, but it does make sense, because when you're in the dream world, they call, this is the other part of being in the field, is, when you talk about different types of fields, that there's different layers of reality, and how that we're all connected to all these different fields and all these different energies, but it's how conductive you are, right, in bringing it back down. So that's super cool. And that was the same for me. Even though I got out of it, my body stopped vibrating. When I would close my eyes, I would still see that sun in my eyes. And this was in the middle of night, so I thought I was going crazy. I thought I had like permanent sleep paralysis. So
you weren't on any psychedelics or anything?
No, I haven't before. So before that, during that experience, and even after, I hadn't taken any types of psychedelics at all. So it was just 100%. It was a pure experience. And yeah, it was cool because I would close my eyes and I would still see the sun, but I would see like fields and colors. And, I would also have like synesthesia, if you've heard of that before, where for people that don't know, people can like hear letters, or people can hear an apple, or they could smell like a painting, right? And see and visualize it. So I had like inklings of that. So it speaks to, again, this is more on the top level, how beautiful and crazy and mysterious this world is. And that's why I'm so interested in this, energy work, because I find that it gives it some backbone and framework for us to understand and to conceptualize what happened to me and what happened to you.
Yeah, dude, there's something about having this type of experience, and it's not to poo-poo anyone who's done psychedelics or anything like that, but having this experience endogenously rather than exogenously, like cultivating it from within yourself without any external substance. There's something about that just unlocks something inside of you that I think again, not to speak ill of any, I've done psychedelics too. I've never, I've only done mushrooms, but I know for me, when I cultivate it without any exogenous substance, it just feels more real and it shows the power that we have innate to us,
Yeah. And that's, I'm a big fan of psychedelics too. I when I make my own content on the mind body connection, I consistently refer back to psychedelics because I think for a lot of people, it is that breakthrough that they can receive and that they're open to, right? Because for them, meditating or doing something endogenously might not be as viable for them. But yeah, again, it comes back to the power of our mind and our consciousness. And when you have these breakthroughs, like for me, that's what set me on my journey. Like that's what did it. Without that experience, I would honestly, Alec, without that experience, I would have still went down the pre-med route, went to, again, not poo-pooing any MDs or DOs, but just going down the conventional route and not questioning what society has taught me and not questioning, why things haven't worked out. And maybe it's just, bad luck. But really, that to me was my first spiritual awakening that, really set me on my path.
Beautiful. So what has that evolved into today in terms of your energetic practices you do, being someone who's an expert in the biofield?
Yeah. And I would say I humbly use expert in the biofield loosely. Like everyone, I'm just another student. And, there's a saying that the best types of teachers is a student that continues, that wants to learn and doesn't accept what the teacher just says, right? You apply it, you practice it, you use what's called accurate perception, correct expression, which is a teacher, the founder of Pranic healing, Master Choa Koksui. He was very much a scientist, but also very much a spiritual, high-level master teacher, right? And he would always say that from his teacher, right? His teacher was this very great Tibetan master, Mahaguruji Meiling, who was the founder of Tibetan Buddhism. And he said that he can only understand like a fraction, a percentile of what his teacher actually tells him, right? And when his teacher teaches to him, it's like getting an encyclopedia download, right? And it's like, here it is. So for me, in my practice, in trying to learn and teach this too, I try to keep the one thing that I can control, which is my relationship to my circumstances, to the people in my life, to my work, to my career and my passion, which what fulfills me is talking to you and other amazing people and talking about this mind-body connection. And it's really about maintaining coherence, right? Which we talk about, and which, on your show, you talk about is bringing, no matter the ups and downs, right? Because challenges will happen in life. What really matters to me is how I react to it. And I noticed that because it's not just emotional or physical, it's a energetic coherence feeling. Like I just know when something is off, right? When you've been meditating, like I have for over 10 years every day, you will know when the tree starts to tilt in one way and I'm like, oh, I didn't react too well. So I have to kind of correct myself. So it's a process of always being mindful of what types of thoughts I'm feeling, what types of thoughts I'm thinking, what types of emotions I'm feeling, and how I'm acting based on those. So, and I'm very much, I used to be a perfectionist. I used to be very hard on myself for making a mistake. But now, part of my practice on a daily basis is, yes, the energy work, cleaning myself out, energetic hygiene, but really paying attention to what happened during, today. And if there were things that I could have improved on, and if I made a mistake, removing the attachment to that mistake, the judgment, exactly, because that's what got my body into the state, was judging myself so harshly and thinking that I couldn't heal. So now the practice itself is going beyond my body with other people, situations, circumstances. So, just trying to make sure I become the best vessel and channel I can be to disseminate these teachings.
Beautiful, man. Do you do anything specific with that? Like any specific type of practice, or is it all pranic healing related?
Yeah, I can talk about the pranic healing ones first and then the others. So in terms of the pranic healing ones, I do what's called meditation on twin hearts. So that was the first meditation that I mentioned to you that first got me into
No way. So the
pranic
one
healing.
the one that like woke you up.
Yeah. So
Wow.
the one
no, sorry, not the one related to the blue ball, the one that you attended.
Yes, the one that I attended.
Okay,
Yeah, the blue ball one was like a YouTube video that I was like, yeah, this is cool. Let me try this.
That's so cool though.
But yeah, that one, meditation on twin hearts is all about heart-brain coherence, right? Which is another way to tap into, the big research that is into heart-brain coherence, which is activating the heart to activate the crown. Because a lot of people, the crown center is really much the spiritual connection. The heart center is your connection to not only yourself, but to others. And for me, the practice has always been to open up the heart first, because the heart is the key. Once you open up the heart, it opens up the crown, and it doesn't work the other way. So, and what's cool is in pranic healing, we actually visualize the chakras. And in the visualization of the chakras, right, you see as petals. But within the crown center, Alec, right, at the center of it is the heart. So when you open up the heart, then the crown can open. So there's some interesting connections that we talk about in pranic healing, how certain energy centers are like paired. So one affects the other. So that's one of my staple meditation practices. And the other types of practices I do is the energy hygiene with the pranic healing when I'm, in an airport, which I'll be in a couple hours, or through work and getting energetic contamination through patients. I kind of work through that. And a really practical way to do that is salt baths or salt showers, which I tell everyone to do. And it's not Epsom salt, which is magnesium. You want to use just regular sodium chloride. So you could be just table salt, cooking salt. It doesn't have to be the fancy sea salt. What I do is I mix it with my body wash if I don't have a time for a bath, and I lather my entire body.
Interesting.
And,
why is that?
So in terms of the physical properties, salt has negative ions.
Oh, so the negative charge.
Yeah, the negative charge is
I could
part
totally
of it.
see that.
As you know, in grounding too, that's very important. But salt energetically, when you scan it, it has a property to break down and disintegrate heavier energy. Okay?
Interesting.
So when I work on someone, right, and it's like when you're washing dishes and your hands get dirty, you feel the grease on your hands. When you apply the salt's almost like soap. It kind of breaks things up a little bit, and then the water, you can wash it off. So
Interesting.
Salt showers is one of the best things people can do for themselves. Because what I find is that for physical or emotional disease, it doesn't happen overnight. It tends to accumulate over time. So that the more energy hygiene you can manage to keep up with, you can kind of delay whatever is going to come, as preventative care there. And then finally, I think my last practice is really it's just journaling, gratitude, putting my thoughts into words. And I think that helps to ground me because, you mentioned Eileen McCusick, who's very much left-brained, and I'm very much left-brained too.
I wasn't saying that in a bad way, by the way, Eileen. I was saying that you're the perfect person to carry this message to the people who are very materialistic.
Right. And she's a huge figure in the biofield world. So
she's the best.
Yeah. And, I try to balance that, because when I find that I write, it activates the other part of my brain, which is more creative, more intuitive, and things will come into me. And that's essentially my practice.
Beautiful, simple, man.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's not super complex, and it doesn't have to be either. That's the thing. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the research that you've come across, because you've made, not to just have you recount the information you've shared in some of your reels, but I am going to have you do that if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Some of the other research you've come across in the realm of consciousness, energy healing, and things like this.
Sure.
I know one off the top of my mind to prime you is related to breast cancer cells.
Yes.
Yeah, if you could share that one.
Yeah. So the breast cancer cells, that one actually comes from Joe Dispenza. And this is one of the older studies. And, I also haven't attended a Joe Dispenza retreat, but I have interviewed Dr. Hemal Patel, which is his lead researcher from the University of San Diego of California. And he studied what's called coherence healings. So basically you have a bunch of people, I would say like 5 to 7 people they're entering into this highly elevated coherent state, right? Usually right after a meditation, right? You get into the zone, right? Your brain waves are in this activated state. And this is where we talked about with cycling, right? It tends to be specific, right? With the Bengston method, you want to see the cancer disappear. You want to see a certain outcome, like a film strip on a movie screen. They're just projecting love, compassion, mercy, right? Holding this intention for this field. And they did it with petri dishes. So it was not only cancer cells, but it was pancreatic cancer cells, I think lung cancer cells as well. And it was in this incubator, which an incubator is a machine that keeps a certain temperature in place so that the cells remain viable. So what's interesting, Alec, and this speaks to how things affect physical reality, when these group of individuals entered the coherent healing state, the incubator is designed to be at a set temperature, right? Always. Okay. When they started the coherence healing, it went from 30 degrees Celsius to 29.9 degrees Celsius for the remainder of the healing until they stopped and it jumped back up to 30. I believe that that was the number. It could be off by a little bit, but going back, what happened to the breast cancer cells and the other cells? So what they found was that their metabolism dropped, that their energy usage from their mitochondria dropped, so they became less viable, suggesting that they wouldn't, reproduce or proliferate as much.
That's incredible, man. So, okay, have you studied Veda Austin's work at all?
I've heard of him. I haven't had the chance to look into him.
Most of you are already aware that our everyday devices are taking a real toll on human biology. Talking about our laptops, our tablets, our phones. Each one of these is hitting you with non-native EMFs, artificial light, excessive blue light, and constant screen flicker. And most of us are feeling the harmful effects whether we realize it or not. But there is a better option. Daylight Computer is actually solving all these problems at the root. And I had an awesome conversation with Tristan Scott from Daylight on episode 202, breaking all this down. Here's a brief clip from the episode.
We have a reflective display technology, similar to a Kindle, which was really the inspiration behind the product overall. It's really intended to be a magic piece of paper. And the reflective technology works just like everything else in nature.
What are some differences between this and a Kindle?
Kindle was the inspiration, but it was limited. It's great for reading, for turn paging, but if you try and do anything else, it's too slow. We wanted to bring a display technology that feels like digital paper, but can do more. It can do email, it can go on the internet, it can go on social media. We created a Kindle on steroids, which now means it's a healthier iPad.
All right, so if you'd like to check out Daylight for yourself, just head to daylightcomputer.com or just head to the show notes and enter code TWF50 at checkout for $50 off your order. And if you're a member of the wayforward.com, just head to the member marketplace and you'll find an even greater member exclusive discount waiting for you there. Okay, so Veda, okay, this is going to blow your mind then. I want you to sort of sit with this and then text me in a few days after sitting with this for some time. Okay, so you're familiar with Dr. Masaru Emoto? Yes. Yeah, okay. So Veda, she has expanded upon Dr. Masaru Emoto's work and made it accessible to laymen and women. And what I mean by that is, her method is she takes water in a petri dish, and exposes it to a thought, a feeling, a written word, a song, a picture, has a friend thousands of miles away, set the intention to think about something specific and project it onto the water that Veda is holding. And she has over 40,000, correct me if I'm wrong, Veda, if you ever listen to this, 40,000 examples of this now, it might be even beyond that, where she takes that water, freezes it, and using a unique freezing method, just a certain time frame where the water's not fully frozen, but there's still like a layer of water underneath, dumps out that water, and in the frozen ice is water's own artistic interpretation of what it was just exposed to the degree that she's developed what she calls hydroglyphs where if she sees the same symbol repeatedly related to, let's say, for example, gratitude, whether you write gratitude in English, Mandarin, Spanish, or it's a picture representing gratitude or a song representing gratitude, or you're feeling grateful, water will always show a 6-pointed sort of like leaf. And what's incredible is that she's teaching her method in workshops, both online and in person, and people are getting the exact same results that she's getting, seeming to indicate that water literally has its own communication language. But what, amongst what I've already said being incredible, what's most incredible to me is the countless examples where Veda has demonstrated, and others have demonstrated, that their thoughts and feelings have a direct impact on the physical expression and orientation of water, right? And that's just at least water, right? I'm not suggesting that we don't have an impact on other things too, or non-fluid material, let's say, like non-water containing material, because obviously cell culture is what we're describing. Water is inside of cells. That being said, where this leads me, man, and everything we've been talking about today is like, I think we severely underestimate our individual and collective beliefs, thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and the impact on the nature of this reality. Because if what Veda is showing is true, okay, we could obviously say that that probably applies to the human body because we're 70% water, 99% water molecularly, 70% water by weight, 99% molecularly. Okay, so it probably applies to our body, which can explain placebo effect, nocebo effect, psychosomatics, and things like this, right? There are countless examples of this. And if water permeates all facets of reality, what might that suggest if you get a large number of people, for better and for worse, to focus on some specific outcome? Like what we're dealing with right now in the world seems very chaotic and tumultuous. And I think it is in overdrive because our obsession with these freaking devices that we're glued to, where if I put this thing down, for most of us, happening around me is just peace. If I'll just fall into that peace. But then I pick this up, I see a mass shooting here, I see a funny video, another funny video, a video that's kind of boring, and then I see another mass shooting, and then I see some politician saying something, and then, oh, this strain of this so-called virus is in this place proliferating. And I'm taking that situation that I'm seeing on this screen to be real. And then I am taking it in, and whether I realize it or not, projecting that into reality through my field, helping to create more conditions for that thing. And I think that can be, I don't want to say hijacked, but also used in a very positive way, like countless examples of the Maharishi Effect, right? Where when people gather, and Joe Dispenza is doing very similar work, and the Heart Math Institute's also doing very similar work, gather and not necessarily even focusing on a specific outcome, although I do think that there is some indication that that might have a better effect related to that outcome, but just focus on cultivating love, compassion, and coherence and aligning with that, that also can have a really tremendous impact on this reality. And I invite the people who are listening and watching, and this is a good reminder for myself because I'm a human being and I fall into those traps. I'm on social media, you're on social media, that like, wow, we are really in control or have, I don't want to say in control, we have a better impact on this reality if we can cultivate coherence inside of ourselves regularly. And I really think we are severely underestimating how far that impact can go, far beyond just our physical body.
Right.
Sorry for that long-winded monologue there.
It's a powerful message, Alec, and thank you for bringing it up. And I know that's the mission of your podcast and your community as well, which is, again, to create this collective coherence. And you mentioned the Maharishi Effect and Lynn McTaggart with the power of 8, and how people that again come together. It seems like the overarching effects are so much more pronounced than we can tend to even spot out because we're not usually looking out for it. And I think this is a really nice reflection on what we're talking about, which is the biofield. It's like people don't think about their biofield. People don't think about the coherence between their mind and body, but like you were saying, like social media, it's like an algorithm, and we're like the water. We're being imprinted, right, by whatever, happy, sad, traumatic video that we see. But it speaks to, again, not only the power that we have as an individual, but as a collective. And something that I try to remind everyone, to bring heaven on earth, right? It starts with you. So self-peace creates world peace, right? And we are the algorithm that hopefully we want to imprint onto another person, right? To have these positive changes where, you mentioned gratitude on that water is like a 6 petals. So we want to imprint those 6 petals to everyone around us. And I think that's the beauty of this work, because when I walk into an airport, and I'm sure it's the same with you, when you walk into a busy street or intersection, I'm very mindful of what I think and feel in the presence of these crowds. And it's a great gift, but it's also a great responsibility, right? Because now you can't go back, right? Even though I'm human too, I make my mistakes. It points to this collective ambition, which is to hopefully help humanity resolve whatever karmic ties and past, all those stored traumas that we have as a civilization, and, to grow and become better out of it. And I really think, Alec, as there are so many unprecedented challenges nowadays, I still think it's like the slingshot effect, right? When we get pulled so far into one end where things seem like impossible and so chaotic and traumatic, we can shoot down the other end where things just, they call it the golden age, where things finally come into place. And it's because we didn't avoid those things that needed to be healed. We actually worked.
Amen, man. Amen. I couldn't agree more. I think we're on the precipice of being catapulted forward right now.
Yeah,
we're being pulled pretty far
I don't think we
back.
have a choice at this point. I think it's happening.
So. I totally agree, man.
Yeah.
Any other research top of mind that you've come across related to the biofield or consciousness, or even like non-peer reviewed, because I don't really care about peer review, like non-peer reviewed stories or things you've heard from like ancient cultures that are really appealing to you that you think you might want to share?
Yeah. I think that, and this is sort of the coming out of the closet moment for me on this podcast. And, I use science as a way to prove to myself that what I believe in is real. But at some point, as you know, Alec, that can only work so far, because there's, I'm running out of data at this point. I'm running out of research to cite and talk about. But really, I think at the end of the day, from what I've learned through my teacher, and I believe everyone has their own teachers, their guides, their ancestors, their teams in the background that are helping us. What I've learned is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And when I say spiritual, we're energetic, we're consciousness, right? And, as current science is finding out, consciousness is not just limited to our physical body. It's transient and can move through different stages. And when you see it that way, I think that it's not really a study, but it helps me wake up in the morning and not feel like I'm responsible for the world, because it makes it much more human to me. It's like, okay, I am human, you are human. We can proceed with our life despite our flaws and all of our challenges. And, what's it going to look like for our children, especially your children, inheriting this world? What is that going to look like? I think that as long as we practice just being a good person and character building, going back to what I talked to you about, I find that that's the whole point of all these healings and these processes, is that it gets us to a point where we're healed enough that we can finally be honest and we don't have to lie, that we can finally be generous and not have to steal, that we can finally be compassionate and not have to hurt someone, reactionary injury, right? That we can finally be hardworking, right? And enjoy doing things that we're passionate about and not be lazy. And I think that that's the goal of all this. I mean, I talk about all the science and research, but at the end of the day, it is really to be a better person.
Amen. Yeah. And then the byproduct of that is like you create a beautiful world in the process. Yeah. It's interesting because like even in me asking that, right? And I highly, highly, highly encourage everyone listening and watching to please go check out Jason's Instagram. It's in the show notes. Please check it out. That's what got me to interview him today. Is I saw his Instagram. I'm like, dude, this dude gets it. I really want to talk to him. But you don't need a study. Like if you just start paying attention in your own life, and I'll just give some very brief examples in my own. Like my son is the one who told my wife and I we were pregnant with our third. How did he know that? There's no physical explanation. He's the one who just walked up to us and said, Mom, you're pregnant. Or I'm sure anyone can think about this, like the number of times you've thought about someone and then they called you right afterwards, or thought about something specific and then you see it later that day, or you have a song that you haven't heard of in a while play in your head when you wake up, and then you hear that song for the first time in a long time later that day. There are so many other examples of this. I think like the point that I'm trying to make here is our biofield is like a muscle that we have that we forgot that we have had, that is in some ways in terms of its utility atrophied. And the more we pay attention to it, the more we're actively working that muscle again, and the more things tend to happen and come into our field, so to speak, related to it. And then you realize, no, this is a real aspect of reality. And it also goes back to what we said earlier. You're not going to do a true, rigorously controlled, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. Obviously, like MD Anderson, places like this are doing pretty good research that establishes pretty strong correlations that seem to be pretty suggestive. And then, of course, the studies that have been done with the Maharishi Effect and crime rates being lowered in Washington, D.C. and things like this. There are countless examples of that. But we're operating through a flawed paradigm. And I want to bring up this Walter Russell quote that I have shared before, and this is paraphrased. But in this quote from The Secret of Light, Walter Russell essentially says, trying to figure out cause and effect in reality is futile because there is only one true cause, and that's God. And I don't know if he says God, but it's God, the one mind, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. That is the true cause of everything. And the more we pay attention to that, we are just a little unique individuation of that, operating in this reality amongst a sea of other people doing the same, and pay attention to that being the true cause. And then reflect on how is that impacting us physically? How is that impacting the people around us? How am I using this unique piece of who I am to help make myself better and the world better?
I just got goosebumps listening to you say that, Alec. And yeah, as you say that, I just felt this, just me being in tune with my own body and biofield and coherence. I just dove deep into the words that you just spoke, and it brought so much for the audience. It felt like entering a warm sun, which is just full of love, passion, and also playfulness. To speak, it's like if we're all just fractals of each other, you know, it's such a blessing because we're not just all one. We're not the same, right? There's so much beauty and diversity in our differences. So thank you so much for that. That's a beautiful
dude, thank you,
reminder.
man. Like this has been epic so far. I have a few other things I want to discuss if we could. So you had brought up wanting to discuss attachment as it relates to like quote unquote manifestation and things like this, like attachments in your field. I'd imagine that applies to other things. And we've talked about entities a little bit and stuff like that. I don't know if that piqued your memory at all, but.
Yeah. So attachments in terms of for manifestation as the topic in general.
I think so.
Yeah. So for me, it goes back to the concept that I've talked about, which is receptivity and conductivity. When you want anything in life, or because what is manifestation? Manifestation is bringing an idea into material form, right? So how does, and this goes with Thomas Campbell and his My Theory of Everything. He talks about manifestation as entropy, right? Because when you have an idea, that's very high entropy. It's very chaotic. There's a lot of possibilities. But when you materialize something, that's low entropy, right? Because this is a phone. It's physical. I can touch it. But what was the process from me having an idea of wanting a phone to actually getting a phone?
Have you heard syntropy? Have you heard that term before?
Yeah, syntropy too.
Eileen's the one who put me on that word. Because like what they call it otherwise is negative entropy. And what we're talking about is the creative force rather than the destructive force. I think it's so wild that they call it negative entropy. Likewise, not to go off on a huge tangent, but negative charge is what we need to receive energy, right? And why do we call it negative charge? Like, I feel like that's an inversion. It should be the other way around. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. It speaks on sciences and, the polarity
things,
and
right.
they're always wanting the black and white everything. But yeah, in terms of attachments and manifestation, so the best way I could describe it and what I've learned and something that I rarely hear anyone talk about manifestation is, yes, having that idea of wanting something is very important, but equally as important is to give whatever you want. So it might not be physical, right? So let's say, obviously, people want money, right? So what does money represent? Because money is a definition. Money represents security. Money represents safety, right? Money represents a sense of health, right? In terms of taking care of yourself. So yes, you can have an idea for your business and things like that. And you take the right actions and steps and planning to execute it. The other part is, as you receive, you give, and as you give, you receive. So giving the definition of money for someone else, right? Physically or energetically or emotionally. And just like the Maharishi Effect, how a group of people tend to come together and have amplifying results. When you give first, it tends to have an amplifying result to whatever you want to receive. So that's why, in all these, spiritual lineages, they talk about giving so much because they know that this physical body is temporary, right? But what you learn and you gain from giving is much more. It's like spiritual food for the soul or the energy or the consciousness that is behind the body. And I can say for myself, right, when I have friends that have certain conditions, cancer, and, in addition to doing the protocols, the, conventional medicine, the biofield healing, they also donate to their specific cancer research centers for their specific condition. Now, I know some people might not agree with certain, institutions, but it's the idea. It's the intention behind it. And what I find that, and it's hard to quantify, but their treatment progress is usually way faster and way more effective than the average person. And their doctor tells them that. It's like, wow, you got so much better and you don't have as many side effects, again, there's a lot going on, but I'm a big believer, whatever you put out into the world, you'll get back. So that's why attachment, going back to your question, is not helpful, because when you have attachment, it's like, yes, you want that thing, that idea, that vision, but the universe has such a bigger plan for you, but you're not willing to let go of that one idea. So, but by giving is detachment, right? So that's why detachment is so important, because it opens up all these possibilities.
I love that so much, because it's like you are then quite literally putting out the energy related to that thing that you want in your physical actions.
Yes. Because if you already have it anyways, why would you need to hold on to it? Right? If you had it anyways, you would just give more of it away.
Wow. I love that. Wow. I've never heard anyone talk about it that way. That's cool, man. Thank you. And okay, I have one more question related to pranic healing. You mentioned that it's a systemized approach. How much is intuition playing a role in that systemized approach? And how much, you mentioned, for example, and I don't know if this is specifically pranic healing, but you talked about the meridian between the thumb and the pointer finger, where the acupuncture textbooks will say it's always at that one specific spot. But you're like, no, like I'm discerning that it's actually here now, just it's moved a little bit. So in pranic healing, because it's a systemized approach, how much of intuition is incorporated into that and overlaid on top of it?
Sure. And that's a great question, because we also highlight that there are many layers of truth, right? So a person can be correct following the instructions, the recipes, the textbooks, but there might be a more expanded way of looking at a situation that might be quote unquote more correct, following intuition. And this is where, Master Choa Koksui, the founder of Pranic Healing, says that truth has many levels. Meaning that, yes, I'm in Austin, Georgetown right now. Yes, I'm in Texas. Yes, I'm on the United States. Yes, I'm on planet Earth. But each of them has different scales. So in pranic healing, yes, for the average person that doesn't have any experience with energy healing, that can't feel it, they can go through the protocol and they can get results. Okay. So that's number one. But for someone that is a little bit more sensitive, that has more experience, intuition comes in because intuition connects to higher energy centers, which again, their body, their biofield, their energy centers has to be at a certain condition. I call a certain state of energetic cleanliness in order to be sensitive and to pick up that intuition. And that comes up in different ways in terms of like, it's like a chef in the kitchen. You don't need to read the recipe anymore. You can just eyeball it and you have a sense of like, okay, this is the right amount. And I think that comes in for different people in different ways. Pranic healing, specifically our foundation, we have the protocols first because it's all about safety and efficacy. I know Reiki and some other practices, it's much more intuition, right? Yeah. Again, you're guided by channeling or connecting to different beings and things like that. But at the higher level, at the highest level, it's all intuition because, they say healing has two elements. Number one, it comes from God, source, the universe. And number two, it's to alleviate suffering. So that's all healing meant to do.
Beautiful, man. Sounds similar to Eileen's work and with biofield tuning, in that hers is actually a systemized approach too. But she's also said that having a strong intuition can be very, very, very helpful in making biofield tuning more effective. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, I told you that I only had a couple more follow-up questions related to pranic healing, but I'm just so curious. When you have your hand over a spot where people are having symptoms, right? What is the intention that you're setting inside of you related to that energetic, what word am I looking for?
Like congestion or block.
Yeah. What are you doing as the practitioner?
And that's a great question because I think a lot of people are visual, especially for me, not being able to see as much, but to feel it. It's the same idea when you put your pan into the sink and you have your sponge in your hand. Like, what are you getting ready to do? You're getting ready to scrub the pan and to clean it. So the process of by what we do is the person's energy field, their biofield is the pan, and my hand is the sponge. And all I'm doing is a certain technique that removes this congestion. And what tells me that it's working is that when I go back again and clean it, it's cleaner, right? The grease is less. The pan is becoming cleaner and it feels like it's normal. Okay. And that's the simplest way I can describe it. And it doesn't take long. Sometimes it's just like 30 seconds and the person says, that my pain is gone, my headache is gone. It works very well for acute symptoms. More chronic things, again, it takes much more time. But
do you find the chronic ones have a deeper emotional attachment?
Yes, interesting. It's just like a complex root system. With every chronic condition, autoimmune diseases, other chronic inflammatory diseases, it's like the root system is all intertangled. So you kind of have to take more time. But like I mentioned to you in the beginning, it's 90% effective for me, before and after, people get better.
That's amazing, man. Wow. So when you're over someone's, let's say you're over a specific organ, are you using any wisdom from traditional Chinese medicine, for example, lungs relating to grief? Or is yours more pranic healing more general? That you have some sort of stagnation in this area and it's not attributed to be related to a specific emotion?
Yeah, that's a great question because in Master Choa, the founder of Pranic healing, he initially wanted to do pranic acupuncture, which was go through the entire system using needles. But he realized that was way too complicated and it was not going to disseminate throughout the world. So he simplified it and just used, no touch. But incorporating those concepts from traditional Chinese medicine, it's like bits and pieces. It's not completely like lungs for grief, spleen for worry, kidney for fear. But because it's incorporating other healing traditions from ancient Egypt, indigenous medicine, qigong, things like that. So he made the system very easy. It was all about simplicity for him. So the solar plexus would be some set of emotions and physical connections, like I talked about. So for me, was the gut and the emotions related to the solar plexus, which is about self-will. So the heart, the front heart is connected to the heart. There's a back energy center called the back heart that's connected to the lungs. Okay, so there were, and then those would have its corresponding emotions as well.
So you mentioned the solar plexus. Is it pulling from the yogic 7 chakras, or is it pulling from the Dantians and Qigong?
Yeah, it's actually both. Because there's actually 12. I should have mentioned this. There's 12 chakras in the pranic healing system, and I know different healers talk about, again, different level of chakras, but these 12 chakras include the Dantian as well, in the standard 7 that we think of in the Ayurvedic tradition.
Got it. Okay. Wow. Interesting. Have you explored whether there's any crossover in Eileen McCusick's The Human Biofield Anatomy and pranic healing at all?
Yeah, and this is what I find so beautiful, because it's hard for one system to describe everything,
of course,
as a whole,
right?
And someone described it really nicely. I'm blanking on his name, but he basically said that every healing system, think of it like the earth, right? And think of like a dot, right? Think about like there's like a trillion dots that make up the earth, but each system fills in that dot in that specific coordinate that makes the whole. So our system is very close to Eileen's, which is very close to Reiki, and etc. So we're all on this side of the planet, which is, more non-materialistic versus the other side. But again, there are many similar themes and analogies, which I tell people, it's all the same energy. It's all the same field. We're just describing it in a different way, and we have different tools to access it. And whether one works better than another is up to your own judgment and your conclusion. So try it out.
I'd be interested to see you be certified in biofield tuning. That'd be really cool too.
Yeah,
man.
I have to. I mean, there's so many. Yeah, I have Eileen's books, by the way. It's on the list of to reads for me. But yeah.
Have you had a conversation with her yet?
No, I think I've reached, very short, emails. But yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about today, man?
Yeah, I think that, in inspiration to your podcast and your community, I think coherence is a word that I would love to be the word of the year, right? Maybe for next year, maybe that's too soon.
No, let's plant our flag.
Let's plant the flag.
Coherence is the word of 2026.
Yeah, because when I walked into your studio and I was telling you, like when I saw the logo, that's exactly what I'm trying to disseminate, and what you're trying to disseminate is to create harmony through conflict. So there's a virtue that's called harmony through conflict. So it's the idea that true harmony doesn't come about unless all the conflict is resolved and acknowledged. So yeah, like going back to the middle of our talk, I think that at the end of the day, science, spirituality, and everything that we're trying to do, it's all pointing at the same direction, which is to alleviate suffering, and it comes from source, from universe, some higher intelligence. And I just hope people just get to see that more, acknowledge it, and try it for themselves.
Amen, man. Thank you so much for being here, dude. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Likewise.